In this week's episode, we talk about the Marriott breach and the latest developments around that. We look at the narrative developing between Sino and US relations. And then in part 2, we look at some further predictions for 2019, focusing significantly on ransomware, particularly with the indictment against Samsung. And Rick provides some top tips for people concerned about that. All on this week's Shadow Talk. Hello and welcome to another edition of Shadow Talk. This week we're going to talk about the recent news, the Marriott breach, and some implications for 2019 as well. Joining me, I'm delighted, it's our holiday party this evening. So in San Francisco, we've got Rick Holland, CISO of Digital Shadows. Hello, Rick. How are you?
I'm well. Happy holidays.
Happy holidays. I remember you previously did a presentation on why you should focus on forecasts rather than predictions. So delighted you could join us for a 2019 predictions podcast. But joining me also is author of recent blog predictions for 2019, Harrison Van Riper. Harrison, lovely to have you here.
Happy to be here.
So we are festively dressed. Rick's wearing his, what do you call that, sweater?
Wu-Tang Clan.
Wu-Tang Clan. For all of you interested in that, please visit Twitter to see him in his full Christmassy holiday glory. But without further ado, let's move on and talk about the marquee the marquee story of the week, and that is the Marriott breach. It's been slowly evolving throughout the week. We don't really know exactly what's gone on, but there have been some reports this week that some of the TTPs are similar to those associated with China. Case closed then, is it?
No, probably not, right? I think we need to wait to see, again, some more information needs to be released on what's going on. Last time I was checking into the news, it was still at 500 million. Is that still the current count?
Yes, I think so, yeah.
Yeah, so again, I think, in these situations when the breaches are very fresh and, hot on the press, it's, good to kind of take a step back and wait to see what information gets released in the next few days.
So, Rick, what's the real value of using TTPs to look to attribute it? Do we know anything with certainty? Does that help us out at all?
Well, and we've had this on previous podcasts with myself and then others from our team. I think for most organizations, attribution isn't something that they really need to get too worked up into. I think knowing that threat actors are targeting you and tracking that stuff is good for internal stuff. But beyond that, knowing who it isn't going to be as valuable for most organizations that are out there. And I think, quite frankly, that stuff is a distraction. But we've talked about that a lot before in the past. Yes.
I think it is interesting with the kind of the growing narrative in the Sino-US relations at the moment, particularly if you look at on the back of the recent arrest. Was it the CFO of Huawei?
Huawei CFO, yes.
It's certainly looking interesting. And I know, Harrison, you've written about this week, about how that may develop in 2019. So what are your thoughts on that area?
Yeah, so, like you say, just recently, the CFO of Huawei has been kind of picked up and facing extradition to the U.S. Previously, in October of this year, there were two different indictments from the U.S. government that basically, some finger pointing, but there was kind of a unique situation in there where we actually extradited a Chinese intel officer to the U.S. And that's pretty unique. It's not... it's never been done before in any sort of sense. So this is a pretty bold move on the U.S. front. And I think this most recent thing is, not likely to aid any of the relationship between the two countries. I think, again, throughout the year, we've been having the trade war going back and forth between the two countries. The relationship is very strained, to say the least.
Yeah, and certainly if any of these indications that it was Chinese actors behind the Marriott breach, I'm sure that would further contribute to that particular narrative. Now, as we've mentioned, that was one of the elements that you mentioned in the blog, and I think you're going to be doing a webinar with the FBI in the next few weeks.
That's right.
So, hey, listeners, register for that if you want all of the predictions 2019. We're not going to be able to cover them all in this particular podcast, but I thought we could perhaps give a sneak preview, some of the most interesting ones. Got a few topics that we can possibly draw from here. This is almost treachery to talk about, but GDPR, I think that is quite interesting of how that will develop in 2019. Rick, what do you think about GDPR? We've had some announcements in the past few months with some fines coming out. Is that setting a precedent? Do you think that's particularly interesting?
Well, I don't think we've seen the huge fines that were perhaps even overhyped at the time. Of course, these cases take time to develop. I think we'll see more in 2019. So I'm kind of curious what is going to evolve, what kind of precedent might it set, actually putting teeth behind it. Probably not unlike if you look back at HIPAA High Tech, when High Tech came out as a follow-up to HIPAA, started having fines there and putting teeth into it. It'll be interesting for sure to follow, but I don't think certainly the hype that we saw going in the spring last year has found its way to reality yet.
Yeah, certainly. And when we were first looking at the implementation of the fines of GDPR, I think everybody was saying, well, what's going to happen is there's going to be come really hard down on a big bank and there's going to be a huge fine and that'll set the precedent. And what we've seen is
Yeah, I think it was about 20,000 euros. One of the things that I want to talk about in the upcoming webinar is, this fact that 2017 was the year to freak out about GDPR. 2018 was when it finally got implemented and when it's, we're seeing what that's actually going to look like in practice. And then 2019 will be the year of fines. So, like Rick said, these kind of investigations, they take some time and they take time to build up from the regulatory point of view. And I think that 2019 will definitely see a lot more of these. I mean, this first fine for GDPR was in November of 2018. So it just gives you some perspective on how long these investigations can take and how companies are reacting to it. It's kind of still...
Early days.
Early days, yeah.
I kind of made light of the low fine that was issued of the 20,000 euros. And I just wonder whether that's actually a good thing. I mean, the reason for that was that they had a bunch of processes in place and they were demonstrating that they were trying their best, essentially. And is that a silver lining for all of this GDPR? That is that a sign? Well, it's actually working. People are taking this seriously. They're thinking about the implications of these sort of things.
I think the sample size is small, and it's so they've been forced to, but this could just be one organization that had a risk-based approach to their security and privacy program and was in better shape than others. So I think the jury's still out, and we need more samples, more data set to kind of make some conclusions on it.
Well, I think there are more data points if you think about how quickly breaches have come to light or exposed information, such as like the Facebook case. I think these things are happening like a couple of days after they're noticed. Admittedly, the Marriott instance was perhaps a couple of years in the making, so
right.
Maybe there are different stories here. That's all for part one. Thanks for listening. In part two, we'll be looking at some more 2019 trends. Hey listeners, hope you're enjoying Shadow Talk. Just a quick note to our regular listeners to say don't forget to subscribe and please rate us on iTunes. Hello and welcome back. We've seen a reduced amount of reporting on ransomware in 2018, and I guess it's probably not gone away, but people got a bit bored of it. What's going to happen?
So ransomware is obviously still on the minds of a lot of our clientele. And, even though we've seen kind of a dip in terms of reported incidents, there's a new report that's come out that says that it's decreased over the first half of 2018. I think that my thoughts on it are that the traditional delivery mechanisms that we've seen for ransomware, being email, we will see that start to continue to decline into 2019. I think you and I maybe disagree on this, Mike, but that's kind of what some of the broader data suggests. Obviously anything can happen within cybersecurity and ransomware specifically, but what are your thoughts on
well,
that?
We were chatting earlier and you posited the hypothesis that we'd see more cryptocurrency mining for people to get more money than with ransomware.
Yeah.
I just don't know whether I agree. I think ransomware will always have a place. And
I totally agree that it'll definitely have a place.
Has the Bitcoin boom stopped?
I think it has a little bit. We've seen just recently in the past, month, wild fluctuations in Bitcoin specifically. Earlier this year, we obviously had a huge spike in value for all cryptocurrencies, really, and that's in my mind what kind of drove this big push to get more cryptocurrency, for criminals to get more cryptocurrency. And so they were looking at ways to do that, being ransomware or other extortion means, really. And after that kind of dip, or after that spike, it's dipped since then. And kind of what's come into play is this idea of cryptocurrency mining, putting a piece of malware either on a machine or putting scripting code within a website to harvest system resources.
I mean, so the trade-off between ransomware and cryptocurrency mining is something that was a topic at the beginning of the year. And has it really changed from then? Is it kind of a consistent trend that we're likely to see into 2019, or has there been any major changes to that?
When you compare, the second half of the year, it looks like it's going to even out to be about the same as it was at the beginning of the year. So a lot of those same predictions that we may have had back then are going to be the same ones that we have now. A rise in cryptocurrency mining malware, that's still on the docket.
Yeah, I just sort of question whether you've got access to thousands of computers with the current shape. So since we did look at it at the beginning of the year, I think the prices have gone down considerably for crypto and e-currencies. Is it as profitable as it was before? I mean, would you not rather harvest bank logons or passwords or something like that?
Yeah, I mean, all that stuff is definitely still going to remain. And you're right. I mean, the volatility of cryptocurrency is what makes it such a hard threat vector to forecast in general, because you don't know how people are going to react to those market changes.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. The volatility is so up and down that it's going to drive behavior. Mm-hmm. Cool story, bro.
So I would say that it's hard to forecast, but it does seem like throughout the year we've seen multiple different factors come into play. So again, with cryptocurrency mining malware, with the volatility that we've experienced after the huge surge at the beginning of the year, and then ransomware has kind of moved to be less of a widespread issue and rather be more targeted in terms of the SamSam infections or GAN-crab infections. Those are very targeted attacks, and they're not as widespread as something like a WannaCry was or a NotPetya. So I think there's a couple different factors that go into it from my point of view.
I mean, if you think about if we look at other external factors, we could look at law enforcement as well. And you spoke about SamSam there. Mm-hmm. Given how prevalent that particular strain was, or that variant, do you think that's going to have a big impact?
Well, and you're talking about the indictments that were just recently announced.
Yeah.
So I mean, the two men that were kind of indicted and named as the SamSam creators and operators, they're based in Iran, so they're not necessarily arrested. They're not in custody, so they could feasibly continue their operations. But it is somewhat of a finger point to say these are the guys that have done it, and maybe avoid it in the future and avoid anything coming from them. But yeah, I don't know in terms of I don't know that will necessarily decrease the SamSam activity. It might be a different variant. It might not be SamSam, but these creators and operators, they've been successful with what they're doing. So I don't see them stopping until they're kind of arrested.
Sure. And we've talked about how the kind of malware developers themselves are developing and changing and looking at the current landscape. And let's talk about that with Emotet shortly. But I just want to touch on, perhaps this is a question for you, Rick, controls, thinking about ransomware. We have talked about this before, but given we're talking about ransomware at the moment, what should an organization be considering if they're concerned about ransomware? There was a recent report, I think, in one state, they were going to make it illegal to pay ransoms. So what should people be considering?
Well, you got to start with your endpoint protection strategy and what you're doing to do that. So next generation AV products, something along those lines, but you definitely want to consider the protection there. And then, internally, we just got done last week with a business continuity planning exercise, the security team and the IT team and some of the lines of business. And you think about your ability to recover from that. What is your backup? Are the things you think are being backed up? Are they really being backed up? things like segregation of duties and logical access controls, so that in an event an endpoint is compromised, somehow network shares aren't encrypted as part of a ransomware attack against your organization. So I think a lot of it is simple things, but I think is important, especially this time of the year as we're going into planning for the next year, is to look at, what's the threat landscape look like? What is my business doing next year? What kind of visibility do I need to understand my exposure in whatever those activities are? And then what kind of countermeasures do I need to be building into my budget to try to protect myself? So these are things that we've been doing in Q3 and now into Q4 here at Digital Shadows from an internal IT and security perspective.
Okay. And Harrison, I noticed when we touched on the legal aspect there, you were wriggling in your seat wanting to say something.
Yeah, I mean, just to touch again on the legal aspects of paying for a ransomware infection, right? As part of those SamSam indictments, they actually put a few of the Bitcoin wallet addresses on the U.S. sanctions list. So that opens up a potential legal implication for companies who may consider paying a ransom. So, again, something to consider. Another thing that adds to my thought that ransomware may go down in the future, but that's kind of where I'm coming from with that.
Mm-hmm. Rick, you're raising your hand. This is a podcast. You can just speak. Go for it.
Yes, thank you. I was going to say, when considering paying out ransomwares, both when I was an analyst at Forrester, I had a lot of conversations with customers there. We have these conversations with Digital Shadows customers as well. And the SamSam nuance is pretty interesting. I always tell folks, you don't want to have a conversation if you're going to pay or not pay in the midst of a SamSam incident in your environment. You want to have these conversations beforehand. You want to involve your legal teams. If you have any sort of cyber insurance policies, you're going to want to involve your insurer as well. There have been stories in working with customers where they have paid out a ransom and then invalidated a insurance policy. So again, this actually ties back to my previous point about kind of continuity planning. You need to walk through these exercises. You need to have multiple roles in here. Again, but I think the main, at least from a risk management CISO level, is you don't want to have these conversations in the midst of an attack. You want to have had them in advance, and you have a playbook so that you know how to respond to them.
Okay, top tips. I wanted to discuss that more, but I think we're at the end of time for this, because I want to go around in the usual style and ask for a key takeaway from each of you. We'll go to Rick Holland. Rick, do you want to talk about playbooks, being prepared, something like that?
I just think risk management, and it's this time of year we're working on our budgets for next year as security leaders and practitioners. So really having a good visibility into your exposure so that you can better understand the risk to your organization, so that you can make the right investments with your limited staff, money, time, all those sorts of things. So I think really this time of the year, and hopefully most of the listeners have gone through this process by now, but we really need to be preparing for next year and have as complete of a risk picture as we can so that we can make the right investment with our very limited resources in 2019.
Okay. Thank you. And Harrison?
So my key takeaway is going to be extremely selfish. I want to plug my webinar that's coming up in a couple of weeks with FBI agent Elvis Chan of the San Francisco Cyber Division. And it's going to be great. It's going to be an awesome discussion. And please sign up.
Indeed. Thank you, Harrison. We'll provide that registration link in the podcast description. So do go and sign up. Thank you, chats, for joining. Thanks, Rick. Always lovely to have you on.
Good to be here.
And thank you to Harrison.
Thank you.
Have a great week.